With a string of recent murder charges in Texas, New York, and Virginia, a gang known as MS-13 appears to be surging again.
According to Houston police, the two young men shown here kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and shot a 15-year-old girl, sacrificing her in the name of Satan. In court Thursday, the accused killers smiled and waved for the cameras. From Texas to New York to Virginia, officers are dealing with a rash of murders attributed to a resurgent MS-13, a notoriously violent street gang. First reported decades ago in Los Angeles, the gang now has thousands of members in at least 42 states, according to the FBI. Robert Capers, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, pinned 7 murders on MS-13, including the killing of 2 teenage girls with baseball bats and a machete. Evelyn Rodriguez lost her daughter.
Prosecutors say 16-year-old Josue Fuentes Ponce and 17-year-old Joel Escobar, both suspected of being MS-13 members, were so afraid that a 14-year-old girl would rat them out for a recent burglary, they made the girl take off her clothes and attacked her with a machete. Her mutilated body was found this month in a creek bed. But last year, Prince George's County, Maryland, had both Fuentes, Ponce, and Escobar in custody for attempted murder in a separate case. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, issued an immigration detainer, but because of the county's sanctuary policy, it defied the request. ICE says, quote, these individuals had demonstrated violent criminal behavior before, and because they were released in spite of the lawful detainer, they were afforded an opportunity to take a life. Authorities from Prince George's County are trying to pass the buck, saying they transferred the suspects to a state youth detention center. Problem is, the 2014 Department of Corrections policy mandates that county jails notify ICE regarding any transfers so that ICE can track down the criminals. Escobar came to the U.S. in 2016 as an unaccompanied minor. Fuentes Ponce came with a surge of families in 2015.
Last month in Northern Virginia, more than half a dozen alleged MS-13 members were arrested after a double murder. And according to law enforcement, most of the suspects arrested in these recent cases were in the country illegally.
There was a horrible case. I was one of the few people to write about it in Kensington, Maryland, 12 miles from the White House, in which an underage sex-trafficked prostitute was beaten with a baseball bat more than 20 times simply because she did not provide, she didn't do her job well enough for the gang.
Last week, after being diagnosed with the flu, a 16-year-old migrant died in Border Patrol custody. Case got a lot of media attention, and those who want stricter immigration controls wonder if the brutal killing of the 14-year-old will get as much attention. So far, the answer is no.
Well, as you just heard, Ariana Fuentes-Diaz's death could easily have been prevented. It wasn't an act of God or some freak accident. It wasn't even a random crime, the kind that inevitably occurs in a country as big as ours is. No, her death was the product of a deliberate policy.
At the end of the Bush administration, MS-13 as a force was almost spent in the United States, which was good for the United States and good for El Salvador because it deprived the gang of money that they used to carry out their heinous acts down there. But as we've seen this flood of unaccompanied alien children, we've started to see the gang become more prevalent.
Our leadership class has decided to downplay the threat of MS-13. Why? Because Trump attacked MS-13. Therefore, in the demented zero-sum calculation of permanent Washington, MS-13 must be virtuous. The enemy of Donald Trump must be my friend. That's how they think. It all started almost exactly a year ago when the president said this.
So when the MS-13 comes in, when the other gang members come into our country, I refer to them as animals. And guess what? I always will.
Once Trump attacked them, the left decided that worrying about MS-13 was a greater threat to our values than the gang itself. Anyone who criticized MS-13 was denounced as racist, if not a tool of Putin.
He basically seems to assume that everybody is part of MS-13. Very strange to hear a president of the United States speak in such dehumanizing terms.
Is it appropriate for a president to ever call anyone an animal, even if they are sadistic gang members?
Yeah, I think that's something to watch out for. The history of political leaders dehumanizing opponents, even criminals, and using animal metaphors is a dangerous one. That is not something that we should accept from an American president.
I do think there's a serious problem with the president dehumanizing any group of people in the United States, even if they are hardened criminals.
We're all God's children. There's a spark of divinity in every person on earth. And so when the president of the United States says, these aren't people, these are animals, you have to wonder, does he not believe and the spark of divinity, the dignity and worth of every person. Every day that you think you've seen it all, along comes another manifestation of why their policies are so inhumane.
The media, of course, dutifully amplified Pelosi's message. She's their boss. That's their job. Vox.com produced an entire video designed to explain that actually MS-13 members are just like your kids.
When you think of the street gang MS-13, what do you see? Maybe something like this. Or this. But what if I told you the typical MS-13 gang member in the U.S. actually looks like one of these young men on Facebook?
The MS-13 members that I've been following are working after-school jobs. They're living with their parents. They get around Long Island on bicycles.
There's no indication that we're seeing a bigger surge of MS-13 than we'd seen in the past.
That kind of propaganda where powerful people are lying right to your face again and again and again. It happens a lot. And it would be pretty funny, actually, if the stakes were lower, but they're not low, they're high. The left defends MS-13 because they can't acknowledge a downside to the open borders they've given us. Once we start talking about all of this, who knows where it might end. So instead, they lecture us about dignity while high school kids get murdered. And for them, that's a small price to pay.